Christianity and Religion. By Nathan Mornday. A comprehensive diatribe, regarding the Jesus myth in the Abrahamic religions. Introduction. When it comes to the Abrahamic religions, my own spirituality, and the focus and direction of my philosophy, there are certain key aspects that should be known and clearly understood. This book will clarify these things and make plain my views and intentions on these, and all related matters. In the past, some have noted that I am in many ways an anti-theist. Some have also claimed that I am anti-spiritual or anti-religious. On a certain level, this is very true, as I have explained on numerous occasions to others. When it comes to Christianity, I am a mythicist, that is, an adamant believer that the character of Jesus was a complex amalgamation of several mythical, historical, and literary figures, combined together with certain universally known and resonating archetypes and pagan motifs. Likewise, some have seen my frustration at trying to explain this position to the undereducated, and have felt compelled to label me as arrogant, rude, judgmental, intolerant, assumptive and dismissive of the deeply held spiritual beliefs of others. In truth, it just becomes tiring trying to explain these things to those who are already so set in their ways and blinded by their own cultural conditioning. Most are filled with a slew of unsubstantiated presuppositions and subjective beliefs based on cultural hearsay and misinformation. Either this, or they simply assume when it comes to the Jesus myth and other biblical legends, that the official story, or something close to it, is what actually took place. And yet, nothing could be further from the truth. Misinformation and culturally based presumptions abound, and most fall into the trap of assuming that there was some kind of historical basis for the character, that it was the many legends which grew up around this supposedly real figure that were later exaggerated and inflated, etc. Instead of doing the necessary research themselves without any predetermined ideas or emotional bias, which would invariably lead them to the same conclusion as I, they instead make this presumption based on the popular, proverbial, cultural narrative, and the historicity always ends up being taken for granted. You may not agree with my analysis, you may reject all that I am about to share with you, but please, try to read with an open heart and an open mind. There is more to history than you can ever imagine. Any attempt to unravel it fully will always fall short to some degree. At best, all I can do is tap the well for you, and perhaps, expand your knowledge and awareness just a bit more, concerning a history that is much older, much broader, and much more intricate, elaborate, convoluted and complex, than was previously thought. After all, there is much we can and should know, and this is much more than what the traditionally religious profess utmost confidence in. I will not spend an inordinate amount of time delving into specific details, as this book is meant to be brief and act as a kind of crash course on the subject of mythicism and Christianity. Much more could be said and has been said in my other books. If you wish to purchase any of them, there will be a link to my online store in the description below for you to do so. Likewise, if you wish to research any of these topics further on your own, by all means feel free, as I've also included a list of references to some of the best online resources as well. Rest assured, this information is not new, it has been known and understood by many for years, but alas, history is written by the victors as they say, and Bible sales would no doubt plummet, and there would be a massive outcry in the streets, if religious books were moved to the mythology section of our bookstores and libraries. Let it be known, in my understanding of history and comparative religions, I stand on the shoulders of many others, and it is only their previous efforts and exceptional work, that have made it possible for you to hear the information you are about to hear. So, all credit and honor must first and foremost go to them for their many sacrifices, and the sincere desire and conviction within them to know the truth and value evidence, logic and reason, above mindless faith and naive superstition. Among them, are, Christopher Hitchens, author, journalist, social critic, Richard Dawkins, evolutionary biologist, science educator; Sam Harris, philosopher, author, neuroscientist; Neil deGrasse Tyson, astrophysicist, cosmologist, science educator; Lawrence Krauss, theoretical physicist, cosmologist; Bill Nye, science educator, mechanical engineer; Peter Joseph, filmmaker, RB advocate, social activist; Michael Shermer, science writer, skeptic, pseudoscience debunker; Peter Boghossian, atheist advocate, religious programming expert; David Silverman, atheist leader, anti-religious educator; Seth Andrews, anti-religious advocate, author, speaker; Aaron Ra, atheist activist, anti-religious apologist; Richard Carrier, mythicist, historian, author, lecturer; Robert M. Price, mythicist, theologian, author, scholar; Kenneth Humphreys, mythicist, author, historical educator; and last but certainly not least, Acharya S., mythicist, author, scholar, historian. Thank you all for your immeasurable contributions to science, philosophy, historical investigation, educational literature, and free thought. I will forever be indebted to you for giving me the courage to question and doubt my faith, and for the answers that help to liberate me from the confines of religion. Chapter 1. Regarding the Bible. If we're going to start somewhere, I suppose the best place to begin would be a thorough examination of the source material itself, the Bible. The Bible is the #1 best-selling book of all time. Catholics and Protestant Christians would say that it is the inerrant, without error, unadulterated, untouched, infallible, 100% perfect, divinely inspired, God-breathed, words of God. Well, I disagree, and here is why. Through much study, extensive research and unending toil, this is what I have found. The Bible may have been inspired, but it is not in any way infallible. Number 1. Beyond the fact that its contents are made up of a convoluted mix of history, ancient mythology, and superstitious and delusion-based religious instruction. Most of the texts used were continuously redacted, interpolated, tampered with, and altered by its earliest authors and translators for personal and political reasons. Keep in mind, no original manuscripts exist, only fragments and copies. Number 2. All of the most popular English Bibles have key words that are continually mistranslated, in order to appeal to pre-existing mainstream Christian views and doctrine. Bible publishers know this full well, yet they continue to sell them as they are, because any changes made in the current versions might affect their sales and cause them to lose revenue. Number 3. Within the Bible itself, a whole plethora of thoughts, actions, attitudes, words, and deeds, are falsely attributed to a supernatural God, when it is obvious that all of these things really came from the corrupted hearts and minds of men. Number 4. Cultural superstitions, personal prejudices, and ignorant assumptions pervade the author's minds in both the Old and New Testaments, influencing their interpretations of events, creating certain moral and doctrinal stances on many subjects, that are then taken by readers to be the literal actions, thoughts and opinions of God. Number 5. Certain stories, themes, and theological concepts, were taken directly from much earlier, Greek, Babylonian, Egyptian, and Sumerian mythologies, as well as many other pagan sources, and incorporated into the beliefs, customs, and rituals, adopted by Jews and Christians, which were then recorded in the Bible. Number 6. Many concepts, words, customs, and traditions, thought to be exclusive only to Judaism and Christianity, were actually borrowed from other cultures, and other opposing religions. These elements were then selectively demonized and condemned, whenever they appeared in their original forms. Yet all the while, the revamped, and appropriated versions, are continuously touted as original, and divinely inspired by Yahweh, Jesus, the Holy Spirit, etc. Number 7. Within the Bible, there are numerous, frequent, genealogical, chronological, and historical mistakes and inaccuracies, as well as many errors in scientific, biological, and cosmological information, reflecting a primitive, Bronze and Iron Age mentality, and a lack of awareness and understanding of the natural world. Number 8. Much of the language, theology, beliefs and themes of the New Testament, have their origins in certain excluded writings, that are now considered completely unreliable and uninspired, by modern Jewish and Christian authorities, the Apocrypha. Number 9. Inconsistencies in accounts, contradictions in teachings, and exaggerations and embellishments pervade the Bible, as well as some of the most idiotic, insane, immoral, and unethical practices and superstitious beliefs, that anyone living today would easily disregard, and view as primitive and regressive. Number 10. Many passages, and even whole chapters at times, are told from impossible perspectives. Outlandish things are explained and described in detail, with no reliable witness present to record or document various monologues and events. One of the biggest problems with the Bible is that the things written in it can be easily taken out of context, taken too literally, or just plain misunderstood by the ignorant masses and corrupt individuals who read it. This can, and has been done, by evil men in power for centuries, giving rise to bigotry, racism, hatred, intolerance, oppression, fanaticism, guilt, fear, violence, torture, war, forced conversions, and a host of other horrors, all done in the name of God, using the authority of the Bible as their justification. The very nature of something that is promised to be an ultimate authority, creates a kind of leverage that almost always gets taken advantage of, misused and manipulated, by those in power who have selfish intentions and evil agendas. For hundreds of years people have used the words of the Bible to control and dominate others. Some of the darkest periods in human history were created by religious leaders, who used the authority of the Bible as a basis for their actions. If this was really God's complete revelation to all of humankind, would not an omnipotent, all-knowing, all-powerful God, have foreseen all of this in advance, and as such, not allowed this book to be elevated to the idolatrous level that it has? No, my friends, the Bible is not complete or perfect in any way. There are things in it which clearly should not be, and things that should be in it which clearly are not. For example, Number 1. The God-ordained killing, plundering, violence, murder, incest, and rape, along with the slaughter of countless sacrificial animals in the Old Testament. Number 2. The endorsement and promotion of poverty, war, genocide, slavery, bigotry, discrimination, sexism, misogyny, homophobia, patriarchy, animal cruelty, child abuse, human and animal sacrifice, and delusional thinking. Number 3. The archaic condemnation of homosexuality and premarital sex, along with the naive promotion of marriage as the only context for any sexual activity. Number 4. The burden, expectation and responsibility of proselytizing and converting others, along with the command to make disciples of all nations. If you don't see all of these things in the Bible, then you don't know your Bible well enough. Likewise, here are some things the Bible does not focus on, which it actually should: the physical, emotional and psychological health and nutrition of human beings and animals. Child abuse, rape, alcoholism, drug abuse and drug addiction. Animal cruelty, animal rights, and wildlife conservation. Love and respect for animals, nature and the environment, women's rights, domestic violence and the rights of the victims. Condemning slavery, making clear the immoral nature of owning another. Now, all of that being said, I still believe that there is a great deal of universal truth contained in the Bible, especially in the New Testament, in Paul's letters to the churches, etc. When it comes to human virtue, goodness and character, when it comes to charity, ethics, morality, and the right way to treat people and the right way to live and be, it's jam-packed with undeniable truth. Likewise, there's a plethora of beauty and inspiration that can be found in the Psalms, and a wealth of practical wisdom found in Proverbs and Ecclesiastes as well. But to base your life on its theologies, to argue over it, to debate, fight, and go to war for it, is just ludicrous and has been proven to me through personal experience and through my own study of history, to be a complete and utter mistake. Draw from it and let it motivate and inspire you when it comes to character and morality and how to live if you wish, but don't base your life on every written word within its pages, because as I've made clear in the previous lists, it is not 100% trustworthy and therefore should not be taken literally, or viewed as some kind of inerrant, ultimate authority in terms of ethics and morality. And yet, we all know that lying, stealing, cheating, and harming others is wrong, don't we? We all know that murder is wrong, we know that envy and lust and greed are all harmful and potentially self-destructive qualities. Do we really need a book to tell us what is right and what is wrong? Isn't it clear within every human conscience that to abuse and mistreat others is wrong? The problem is not that we lack a knowledge of ethics or an established standard of morality, the problem is motivation. What incentive do we have to not do these things? If there is no system of ultimate rewards and punishments, then there is no real drive to be good. A very sad commentary on the human condition, but it's the truth. Hence, the Bible speaks of heaven and hell. But all cultures and all people, from every nation, kingdom, tribe, and tongue, that has ever existed, have developed their own belief systems with regards to this. Christianity just happens to be the most popular and widely accepted version in Western culture. What is any religion but a social tool? An institution created and used by human beings to achieve a certain level of order and civility within their own society. An emotional band-aid, perpetuated and promoted to comfort and console those who are hurting, those who are mourning, and those who are in pain. A primitive attempt at science and history, invented to explain human origins and the ultimate purpose for our existence, and our ultimate future destiny as well. This is exactly what religion has always done and continues to do right now. Judaism and Christianity are just two Middle Eastern versions. The end result of a lot of exaggerated history, cobbled together with many iconic myths and legends that were adopted from other cultures and other religions, all of these eventually being incorporated into the Jewish Bible and the writings that make up the New Testament. Contrary to what most think, the beliefs and theologies of the Bible developed gradually, over a long period of time. Once solidified, these myths and stories were then popularized and promoted by religious leaders for social and political reasons. After this, they were dogmatically enforced and used to control the masses in order to gain wealth and power. The history of the rise and spread of Christendom is actually a very, very sad tale, one ultimately stained with corruption, violence and blood. The process of the formulation of Orthodox Christian theology and the subsequent canonization of the Bible, was fraught with injustice, promoted through oppression, and founded on lies, and deceit. So, by all means, don't just take what some pastor, or preacher, or theologian says about the book to be the very words of God. Read the book for yourself and study history and then make your own decisions. The Bible may very well be the words of God, meaning, much of it is inspired, human writing, but it is in no way the complete Word of God, coming directly from an active personal God that dictated each chapter and verse. This becomes obvious just by reading it. People tend to think of holy books as some kind of package deal that came straight down from heaven, translated, organized and leather-bound, with a big stamp across the cover that says, God's Word. No, my friends, the writings in that book, just like every other so-called sacred text, started out as legends and stories, passed on as oral tradition at first, from generation to generation. These tales were then carefully selected and filtered, with elements added to it and subtracted from it, for social and political reasons. It was then copied and recopied again and again by hand, sometimes very imperfectly, then interpreted and recopied by other believers, many of whom had their own agendas that were less than noble. It was then translated, often inaccurately. And all of this, before it was finally mass-produced, published, and distributed, in order to eventually be made available to you, the consumer. Does this sound like a book that can be trusted? Does this sound like something absolute and perfect, infallible and without error, that you can base your entire life upon? I don't think so. As I said before, this is a book that has developed over time, 1,400 years to be exact, even as the theologies presented within were gradually developing, changing, and steadily evolving over time. As such, the author of one book may disagree with the beliefs of the author of another book, etc. Most of the original authors themselves were writing subjectively, interpreting events and experiences through their own personal belief systems, rehashing oral traditions and ancient mythologies that were passed on to them, based on what was popular in the culture at that time. There were many copies of these original writings, but what we have today are only small fragments of copies of copies of copies, of the originals. There are thousands of these copies in existence today, but each one differs from the other, with variants and mistakes numbering well in the thousands, and all of them differing from earlier copies as well. So the question arises, who decides? Who decides which manuscripts get used and what exactly gets put into our English Bibles today? What exactly gets promoted as the Word of God and what exactly gets left out and discarded as heresy? The Jewish transferring system may have been noble and legitimate enough. We know that most of the Old Testament manuscripts are fairly reliable, because of the meticulous nature of the Jewish scribing method, but many of the later Christian copyists already had their own preconceived ideas and thoughts and concepts, all of which, be it intentional or unintentional, ended up bleeding into the text during the process of copying and translation. There is also the problem of canonization. Which books get put in, and which books get left out? Which ones are inspired and which ones are not? Who decides? Well, there were many other books and writings in circulation that were no doubt considered to be just as inspired, even by the Bible's original authors, but these books, Apocrypha and Pseudepigrapha, were later rejected and omitted by religious authorities in an effort to create and promote a particular dogma. The whole process of establishing what was to be orthodox was accomplished by men who may, or may not, have had pure motives. When they finally decided exactly which books would make up the Old and New Testaments, many of the alternate writings were systematically gathered up and burned. In fact, any and all literature that ran contrary to what was officially established by the Church to be inspired, was routinely suppressed and destroyed. All of this is documented, historical fact. A quick glance at the history of Christianity will confirm everything that I've been saying. Research the burning of the Alexandrian Library, or the suppression of Gnosticism, the persecution of the Jews and Cathars, the torture and murder of Unitarians, pantheists, atheists, freethinkers, and other so-called heretics and blasphemers. Or, the bitter rivalries that occurred between Catholic and Protestant factions, that always ended in violence, torture, bloodshed, and the burning of thousands of books. Beyond all of this, when reading the Bible, knowledge of the identity of each of the original authors and their intended audience should be essential. And yet, as any good scholar would tell you, most of the authorship is unknown, the names assigned to each book being more a product of tradition than actual fact. The time period and historical background in which the writing took place and the various dialects, idioms, word forms, and figures of speech, should all be understood and taken into account as well, so as not to interpret certain passages literally when they should be understood figuratively, and vice versa. The culture, customs, traditions and rituals of the time, along with the current mindset and motivation of each author must also be considered. The reader should have at least some knowledge of the original languages, and the various editions and omissions of the early and later copyists. I believe, that all these and more, should be understood in order to accurately comprehend the Bible, since all of these things are actually vital and necessary to properly read, study and grasp the true meaning of the text. Now, you tell me, how many people actually take the time to do all of this? Few, if any. Is it not much more common just to read into the text and see what someone else has already purported it to mean? Most, if not all, simply swallow what their particular church teaches them concerning these things. Or maybe they develop their knowledge through books, radio shows, or TV sermons, produced and created about the Bible. Yet, all of these will naturally reflect the preconceived notions and biased viewpoints of those individual proponents and sponsors, and to the one truly searching for answers, it will do nothing but create more confusion, more misunderstanding, and an even greater separation from the truth. Again, this is not to say that all of these methods and mediums cannot become avenues for the truth to eventually be communicated and conveyed, but who wants to weed through putrid garbage to find a precious pearl? Wouldn't you rather take the plunge yourself and dive into the waters of history, to find that most valued and priceless treasure? Use your own sense of logic and reason and formulate your opinions based on the evidence derived from all available sources, not just the popular, proverbial few? That is what I have done, and that is why I trust no one, and why I compare and analyze every angle, every aspect, and every view, until I can firmly establish who, and what, and where, and how, and why. Anyone who claims to be a believer and a seeker and follower of the truth, should do no less. A few quotes to consider. Do not blindly believe what I say. Do not believe me because others convince you of my words. Do not believe anything you see, read, or hear from others, whether it be of authority, of religious teachers, or of sacred texts. Do not rely solely on logic alone, nor speculation. Do not infer, or be deceived by appearances. Do not give up your authority and blindly follow the will of others, this will only lead to delusion. Instead, find out for yourself what is true and what is real. Discover that there are virtuous things and there are non-virtuous things. Once you have discovered for yourself, give up the bad, and embrace the good, Gautama, Buddha. When I grew up in the South, I was taught that segregation was the will of God, and the Bible was quoted to prove it. I was taught women were by nature inferior to men, and the Bible was quoted to prove it. I was taught that it was okay to hate other religions, especially the Jews, and the Bible was quoted to prove it, John Shelby Spongea. The Bible has noble poetry in it, and some good morals, and a wealth of obscenity, and upwards of 1,000 lies, Mark Twain. Chapter 2. Absurdities and Atrocities. Some may argue that faith in these concepts can only be a positive motivator, or at the very least, a benign artifice that causes no real harm. I disagree. Christianity is unhealthy and dangerous, because it claims to provide all of the answers when it comes to the most fundamental questions regarding human existence. For example, where did we come from? Why are we here? What happens after we die? How should we live our lives? What really matters in life and what is significant in terms of ethics, morality and human purpose, etc. This is why it has been able to remain so powerful and enduring for so many centuries, not because any of it is true, but because it addresses the universal needs we all have for purpose, meaning, consolation, and hope. Yet it does this through deception, by teaching and promoting fantasy, myth and legend as if it were truth, and this leads to emotional imbalances and delusional thinking regarding the nature of reality, when embraced by sensitive or unstable people. And, in the case of Christianity, its adherents are not trying to make the world a better place, or protect the environment, or progress and evolve as a species. On the contrary, what they are trying to do is coerce anyone and everyone to believe in a human sacrifice that allegedly occurred more than 2,000 years ago, in order to erase a genetic curse inherited by the first humans, because they listened to a talking snake, who told them to eat a magical fruit that gives wisdom from a forbidden tree. They believe that telepathically speaking to their invisible deity, to eliminate this invisible curse, will then allow them to live forever in a paradise world that you go to after you die, or after you are corporeally reassembled and brought back to life at the end of time, depending on how you interpret it, even though there is absolutely no demonstrable evidence for any of this, and no such place and no such deity, or deities, has ever been definitively proven to exist. And yet, you are required to believe such rubbish and build your life around it, even though it's all based on fantasy, while being praised and commended for mindlessly accepting without questioning what they consider to be a gracious offer of divine love and mercy, despite the fact that if you reject this placebo, your soul will be sent to an everlasting torture chamber, according to them, where you will suffer in unspeakable agony for trillions and trillions of years without end. Somewhere in the middle of this lunacy, the mythical God-man is also supposed to return to the earth to resurrect and judge everyone who has ever lived, including the evil monsters responsible for it all, the fallen angels, and destroy the entire planet with fire, only to remake it again for those who have faithfully committed themselves to this insane doctrine. Invisible beings who travel to and from a transcendent dimension are all around us at all times, and if you say the aforementioned magic spell, the salvation prayer, you get to live forever. These are the essential teachings of Christianity, and precisely what I used to wholeheartedly believe. I have suffered from this insidious brainwashing and indoctrination firsthand, and I have seen the negative consequences of it in my life and throughout all of history. This is not a happy, fluffy, fairy tale. It's a doctrine that tells you at times, to give up all of your possessions, to put this cult leader Jesus, before your own family, and encourages us to respond passively and meekly in the face of evil and oppression. It promises an apocalyptic destruction of the world and praises blind faith above common sense, logic, and reason. It promotes the false belief in miracles and spontaneous healing, and it perpetuates a primitive, superstitious mindset that demons and spirits actually exist, and as such, represent the real causes behind sicknesses, diseases, mental disorders, and other psychological, emotional, and biological maladies. It encourages mysticism, magical thinking, and the unsubstantiated concept of a supernatural world. It is in every way the enemy of science and reason, and has been a noxious bane to our species since its sordid and convoluted inception so long ago, hindering progress and stifling human education, oppressing free thought and inquiry, and imposing unnecessary guilt and shame onto those who embrace its dogma. Adding to this, it also promotes self-loathing and a deep resentment of the human body, the teaching that we have a fallen, sinful nature, etc. Historically speaking, it's given us, the Crusades, numerous holy wars, forced conversions, perverted popes, corrupt bishops, wicked cardinals, asceticism, ritual sacrifice, of both people and animals, honor killings, the stoning of women, genital mutilation, forced exorcisms, the justification of slavery and racism, suicide bombers, fanaticism, extremism, hypocritical preachers, greedy televangelists, pedophile priests, and scheming faith healers. Should I go on? What about the concept of hell? This damnable lie didn't even exist until after the metaphor about Gehenna, the burning garbage dump outside of Jerusalem, was literalized and turned into an official doctrine by the Church. The millions of innocent souls who were sadistically tortured and burned alive during the Middle Ages, the millions more who lost their homes, their property, their freedom and their lives, as Rome conquered and spread its maniacal reach across the known world, using this doctrine to instill fear in the hearts of all. All the pagan tribes and the indigenous peoples of old, whose entire civilizations were systematically wiped out, as they were conquered and enslaved in just a few decades, or suppressed and eventually destroyed altogether, as Christianity spread across Europe and then invaded North America, prompting colonialism and the genocide of Native Americans, with the ongoing deconstruction of their proud cultures and continuing subjugation and marginalization of their people. Consider the promotion and encouragement of racism, slavery, bigotry, sexism, hatred, discrimination toward atheists, LGBTQ people, and the oppression of women. The justification of child abuse, the barbaric and inhumane ritual of animal sacrifice, still continuing today in certain sects of Judaism and Islam, the subjugation and annihilation of other races and cultures, historically, and the rejection and condemnation of others, currently, who hold beliefs different from their own. The perpetuation of myopic anthropocentrism and human superiority above other animals, and the mindset that we should dominate the earth and that all biological and natural resources are ours to do with as we choose, etc. I could go on and on. The point is, if you don't have a problem with Christianity, then you simply don't know enough about it, and you don't know the history of your own religion. All of the aforementioned things and more make it impossible for me to ever in good conscience associate myself with this religion again. Just by sheer principle of the countless number of crimes and injustices carried out due to its blind adherence and subsequent promotion in the world. All of this started with a simple story, but because that story was wholeheartedly believed and taken literally and viewed as actual history, the most evil and despicable men have risen to power and committed atrocities the world over. I will always teach the truth about this and maintain my stance, so that the memory of those countless souls will be honored, and for the greater purpose of preventing these kinds of things from ever happening again. As you can see, I'm extremely passionate about this subject and I actually do have a great deal of knowledge in this area, so I have much to say when it comes to this. And yet, some have admonished me to focus on what I do believe and not waste my time and energy attacking what I know to be false, but what they fail to realize is that my views on this are actually one half of my belief system, a critical understanding and awareness that, on a certain level, actually motivates much of what I do when it comes to biopantheism. Christianity is the antithesis of environmentalism. It is the opposite of our shared belief in the divine all, in that, it is the exclusive belief that only one human being was ever wholly divine, and it postulates that we are all filthy, unworthy, incorrigibly wicked, and in need of rescue, redemption, and salvation, from an external, transcendent, anthropomorphic God. It teaches that we are separate from God and that all humans will eventually be separated even further, into two distinct categories at the end of time, where one group, the majority, will be judged and suffer in endless agony for all eternity in the fires of hell. How can this possibly be synthesized with pantheism or veganism? How could anyone call this ancient wisdom? How could this ever be good for humanity? To teach children and despairing adults that they are lost and hopelessly corrupt until they submit to a higher authority and prostrate themselves and grovel at the feet of this ultimate ruler and judge. Can we not see the obvious, earthly, political motivation and intent here? And remember, this is a celestial dictator who would damn you to hell forever, were it not for a bloody human sacrifice, as if that primitive, tribalistic concept is somehow valid. A sacrifice, mind you, that occurred over 2,000 years ago, that is supposed to magically erase the imaginary sickness that you inherited from the first humans who ever lived. A sickness that this invisible being gave you in the first place, by allowing a fabled devil into a fabled garden to tempt Adam and Eve, which was really just a clever rewrite of at least two or more much older Sumerian creation myths, involving a serpent and similar characters with nearly identical names. Can you see now how utterly ludicrous and absurd it is to base your life on this nonsense? And yet, this is Christianity. This is the belief system that some would say has at its heart the message of pantheism. How could this possibly be so? Beyond all of this, I've personally seen, felt, and experienced the damage done by this doctrine. Most may not know this, but I spent the better part of my life as a Christian, thoroughly engrossed in this belief system, more on this later. So let me just say, There is a very specific reason why pantheism exists and why it has experienced a resurgence in popularity today. It is a rational, science-based philosophy, or awareness of the world, that rejects the supernatural and seeks to bring all of the focus and attention back to this life. It does not tout mythical tales and legends, as being of any great significance, the way Christianity does, but instead, highlights the glory and wonder of nature and reality alone. It is a movement away from the mysticism and superstition of our ancestors, that have plagued us culturally and caused so much harm historically. How could we ever forget all of those martyrs hideously tortured and burned alive, who were branded as heretics because they rejected the Church and all that it stood for? To embrace Christianity on any level, is a slap in the face to them, and a mockery of what they dedicated their lives to, and nobly suffered and died for. No, I don't have an axe to grind, I have a conviction to follow. My goal is to teach and promote the truth, and I don't want to delude people, or mislead anyone, in any way, shape, or form. And the idea of somehow merging, or melding, pantheism, with an Iron Age belief system that is so altogether contrary to it, makes absolutely no sense to me. Similarly, I don't want to give people false hope, or promote anything that might be erroneous, or inaccurate, and that's exactly what all religions represent to me: inaccuracy and a primitive, unenlightened mindset, ignorant and immature attempts at understanding the world, etc. And, in the case of the world's three great monotheistic religions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, a nefarious form of socio-political control, that plays off of people's deepest needs and fears. This is precisely what Christianity did to me, and I never want to perpetuate those lies and falsities ever again. I've seen the damage caused by magical thinking and delusional mindsets, and this is what I strive adamantly against in everything I do. I am not a close-minded person, but I will never go back to how I was, and I feel very strongly about teaching the truth and embracing the beauty and wonders of reality and the natural world. Not the supernatural or mystical traditions of a bygone era. And anyway, why bother entertaining or investing in something that is built on lies and fiction, and has so much blood and corruption associated with it? I'm not sure how many out there are aware of the history and socio-political motivations I've been discussing here, or if you really understand the negative consequences of fundamentalist and even moderate religion the way I do. If not, I'm sure all of this must seem very strange to you, if you've been taught all your life that religion is a good thing, or that religion leads to ethical behavior, etc. I suppose this is understandable, since religions do in fact deal with ethics and morality, but it is a grave mistake to assume that morality comes from religion, when the reverse is actually true. Human beings develop morality as we collectively advance and evolve, and religions merely reflect that current understanding, and in the case of the Abrahamic faiths, attempt to co-opt it and claim their holy texts, and their God's revelation as the original source. In truth, it is religion that is always being forced to concede to modern morality and play catch-up with secular and humanistic values, when it comes to ethical and moral behavior. If you doubt this, consider the Catholic Church and its long-standing tradition of demonizing scientists, alchemists, philosophers and freethinkers, only to grant them their official pardon posthumously, often decades later after the individual is deceased. How many, I wonder, have researched these subjects in depth, or experienced personally the damage done by mainstream religions as I have? This may be the determining factor for why you continue to be accepting or tolerant when it comes to this. If you've suffered nothing due to theism, or only equate religion to the charming, benign customs and traditions of your particular culture or family heritage, then all of this will seem very strange and uncalled for indeed. Many often conflate religion with morality and righteousness in people. But you must understand, many others like myself have actually suffered a great deal and lost everything due to religion, and even had their lives ruined because of it, oftentimes repeatedly. I have personally watched as friends have suffered severe depression and turned to drugs and alcohol to fill the massive void left by the delusional and unrealistic expectations these belief systems encourage. To those who take these claims seriously, it can be a nightmare of confusion and disillusionment. Something you may not understand, if you've only ever been, or known, moderate, or liberal Christians, Jews, Muslims, etc. Likewise, I suppose I can appreciate the openness of some, to recognize the scintilla of light that may occasionally manifest through Christendom and other such paths. But in my eyes, there has simply been too much evil, too much bloodshed, too many broken hearts and broken lives. So much fraud, and manipulation, and corruption, and greed, and perversion, associated with it, that it utterly boggles the mind. The distortion, and the lies and sordid nature of it all disgusts me, so much oppression, bigotry and violence in the name of God. And I know that I am not alone in perceiving things this way. There are many others who have suffered similarly under the indoctrination of the Church, and have successfully freed themselves from its maniacal grip. So, why go back? As I've always said, I don't oppose what others get out of Christianity, or the relationship that moderates, progressives and liberal Christians may have with it, but truth be told, if I had the power, I'd stamp it out of existence forever, simply for the enormous amount of harm it has already inflicted on humanity. Just the teaching of hell and eternal damnation alone, is enough to render it completely atrocious as a movement and cement it as an incorrigibly wicked blight upon our world. Study the Inquisition, the corruption of the papacy, the Crusades, the burning times, and the medieval witch trials, and it will make your heart sick with disgust and your stomach will churn in revulsion at the level of violence, abuse, cruelty and sadism inflicted upon the innocent, at the hands of this vile and abhorrent institution. The belief in a literal Satan, delusions of a supernatural world, the need for a mediator between God and humanity, the oppression of women, the view that the earth and all of its denizens are here for us to exploit. All of these things make it detestable and utterly incompatible with pantheism and veganism in my eyes. Call me an anti-theist, but I only seek to explore the world and spirituality through science and philosophy, using logic, reason, and the information that our senses provide. No mysticism or transcendental experiences required. No hearkening back to ancient Bronze and Iron Age myths for comfort, reassurance, or inspiration. And no need to rehash and reinterpret, something that clearly did not have pure or noble origins to begin with, and has subsequently instigated some of the most horrible acts of violence and atrocity throughout history. Once you consider these things carefully and mindfully, I trust you will feel the same. When people embrace these theologies, especially in the case of evangelical Christianity, if they are a good person, the fear of hell creates an incredible sense of urgency, and the need for salvation becomes first and foremost in your mind. It overrides our natural sense of logic and reason, and people will resort to all kinds of unsavory tactics to make converts and win people over to Christ. But I ask you, faithful believer, if you truly are a follower of Christ and you believe in the God of the Bible, have you ever sincerely just thought about these things with an unclouded and sober mind? Have you ever really taken an honest look at history and applied what you believe to the world as a whole? Consider, there have been millions upon millions who have lived and died, without ever having properly understood the gospel message. Thousands of souls who've believed for the wrong reasons and just went along for the sake of others. Hundreds of battles fought, wars waged, brutality, torture, violence and bloodshed, all in the name of a religion that was, supposedly, intended to promote peace, love, and goodwill toward all. Consider again the Spanish Inquisition, the Crusades, the witch hunts, and the countless burnings and executions. So much evil and hypocrisy, so much sorrow and pain. Can you not see the division and conflict and turmoil that religion creates? The damage done by trying to convert and proselytize the world? Ah, yes, but Christ said he came to bring a sword and set fire to the earth and separate people, right? Please open your eyes. There are millions who've never even heard the name Jesus or laid eyes on a Bible. Millions more who reject God and deny this belief system every day, because of the hypocrisy that surrounds it. And even more who don't care and don't even see the relevance. Most just have their own religious traditions, that they will follow semi-reverently until the day they die. Is it a sin to obey your parents? No? Then why would God condemn all of those children raised in Muslim homes? All the people who fight and die every day for what they believe in, people who all have varying faiths and religions outside of Christian theology. Are they all lost because they don't follow 100% specifically what you were taught to believe? This is not even taking into account all the Christians throughout history who didn't have the right doctrine, or didn't fully understand the plan of salvation. All those who were believers in God, but never really accepted Jesus into their heart and made him their Lord and Savior, etc. Tell me how it makes any logical sense, that a loving, all-knowing, all-powerful, merciful, compassionate, and benevolent Creator would condemn these souls to an eternity without Him, or punish millions just for believing something else, that they were similarly taught by their parents, or worse, condemn human beings simply for not believing, all based on something they had absolutely no control over? What about the Buddhists, the Native Americans, the Hindus, or the Jews, who are all faithful and devoted to their particular religions and culturally endorsed spiritual paths? So, according to mainstream Christianity, every single Jewish person who was tortured, and died so horribly in the Holocaust, is now suffering, or will one day suffer, in unspeakable agony and torment, in a fiery pit, for all time. And you call this the good news? Have you ever thought about these things, I wonder? Have you ever truly questioned your beliefs when applied to the world, to history, to your own, non-believing friends and family? These are the hard questions you must ask. These are the questions any mature, thinking person should ask, with regards to this belief system. A few quotes to consider. Those who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities. Of all religions, the Christian should of course inspire the most tolerance. But until now, Christians have been the most intolerant, of all men, Voltaire. All national institutions of churches, whether Jewish, Christian, or Turkish, appear to me to be nothing more than human inventions set up to terrify and enslave mankind, and monopolize power and profit. Each of those churches shows certain books, which they call Revelation, or the Word of God. The Jews say that their Word of God was given by God to Moses, face to face. The Christians say that their Word of God came by divine inspiration, and the Turks say that their Word of God was brought by an angel from heaven. Each of those churches accuses the other of unbelief, and, for my own part, I disbelieve them all. Thomas Paine. Chapter 3. My Christian History. I remember when I was a believer and how frustrated I felt with the seeming complacency of other Christians. I talked to anyone and everyone that crossed my path because I cared so deeply about their souls and their eternal destiny. I couldn't understand why other Christians weren't more zealous and more motivated to talk about it and do the work I believed we were all called to do. Yes, I too used to think this way, but I was looking at the world through a bubble, stuck in the box of what was supposedly orthodox Christianity. Since that time, I've learned and experienced countless things that have changed my views and made me question everything when it comes to religion and God. And that was a good thing, otherwise I'd still be running around trying to fix everything, and save everyone. Most have no idea of the burden people are forced to carry because of religion, the tremendous guilt and anxiety, the misery and confusion, the inner turmoil and roller coaster ride, of trying to correctly read all of the signs, and figure out and interpret and follow God's will. Being utterly disgusted by the corruption and fallen nature of the world and discouraged by everything you see and hear and experience, in comparison to your unrealistic, elevated ideals and standards of goodness and morality. Being fearful and superstitious of other spiritual practices and anything related to the occult, etc. I have no desire to make this book about my own personal woes, so at the risk of this becoming an autobiography, I will attempt to keep this brief and simply share some things about my own background and history when it comes to this belief system. If nothing else, just to relate to those reading or listening, who may happen to still be inculcated, and, at the very least, perhaps cast some light on my own credentials and why I am indeed qualified to speak about these things with such confidence and authority. There is so much I could say, but I'll do my best to keep it brief. For more than 15 years, I made it my life's goal to understand these things and make sense of exactly what Christians believe. When I was 19, I went to Bible college, because I wanted to help people and be a youth minister. I felt called to be an evangelist and my heart was wide open and I was on fire for the Lord. I read my Bible every day and studied profusely. I prayed every day, and spent more time searching, seeking, and witnessing, than anyone I knew at the time. I quickly learned, however, that things were not what they should be, and with much frustration and disillusionment, I chose to drop out, after experiencing the incredible hypocrisy of the modern-day church. This was just the beginning of a huge series of disappointments that persisted for the next 7 years and continued to chip away at my beliefs and erode my faith, from outside and from within. Ever since my late teens, I've been on a never-ending journey, it seems, to understand the Bible and this very same religion, and it's no exaggeration to say that I very likely spent thousands of hours reading, researching, studying, and praying. I even taught myself how to read both Hebrew and Greek, so I could study the Bible in its original languages. I've got boxes and boxes full of books on Christianity, and multiple copies of each of all of the major translations. Everything, from the popular New International Version, to the more accurate New American Standard, to the poetic King James Version, to the more easily understood New Living Translation and Contemporary English Version. All these, along with many other study Bibles, references, concordances, devotionals, and commentaries as well. I've followed after famous preachers, authors and theologians like Billy Graham, Charles Stanley, Chuck Swindoll, Hank Hanegraaff, Josh McDowell, John Hagee, John MacArthur, J. Vernon McGee, C.S. Lewis, Oswald Chambers, Erwin Lutzer, and many others. I've collected hundreds of tracts, videos, tapes and magazines. I used to work at a Christian bookstore and it was my job to sell Bibles, help people find what they were looking for, and better understand their own faith. I've listened to every preacher, pastor, reverend and priest, and considered every view, every interpretation, every doctrine, dogma and creed. I've met atheists, agnostics, fundamentalists, Catholics, Protestants, Baptists, Episcopalians, Methodists, Pentecostals, Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, Jews, Wiccans, and Satanists, and have also been ministered to, and counseled by, all of these, and used to minister to and counsel all of them regularly as well, either from my house, or on the phone, or over the internet. I found God after experiencing a series of extremely bad trips, while using LSD when I was a teenager. Eventually, I quit doing drugs and disconnected myself from all of my non-believing, worldly friends, and started preaching, teaching, and leading others to God. I read and studied the Bible daily and soaked up knowledge like a sponge. I was baptized in the ocean at sunrise, and I attended a non-denominational church regularly for years. This church was directly across from my house and it was like a second home for me. I would go to Sunday school and midweek Bible studies, and I was very close to the pastor, his wife, and all of the elders and deacons. I led many to Christ and even baptized several people at their own request. I was involved in Young Life and used to meet with the Christian Surfers League, weekly. I've probably visited almost every church in the Hampton Roads area, as I used to deliver a Christian publication known as The Paper, to all of the various churches, in and around Virginia Beach, Norfolk, Portsmouth, and Suffolk. I was involved with many different religious groups and I corresponded with pastors and preachers from all denominations. I even worked for Pat Robertson for a time at CBN, and used to hang out in the campus library at Regent University, to read and study all of their books. I've written hundreds of papers and essays on the subject, and talked to countless people from all walks of life. Every person has their own ideas and concepts about God, and every person has a right to their own beliefs, that freedom is protected by our laws and our Constitution, but when it comes to Christianity, all of that personal entitlement gets thrown out the window, because of the nature of this religion. Because of the Great Commission and a few misunderstood verses, it all of a sudden becomes necessary to convert and proselytize everyone, whether they're ready for it or not, and most of the time, it's usually against their will. And just like in medieval times, if they refuse or disagree, they are either forced into it, or judged and condemned for being a lost sinner and told that they're going to hell. What kind of madness would make you preach of ultimate love and compassion, and then in the next breath, turn around and condemn and judge another, claiming that this same forgiving God punishes irrevocably? As a thought experiment, look up the words that get translated hell, eternal, and punishment, in the Greek, and see what you find. Trace the history of the doctrine of eternal punishment and you'll come to see that it was not what the earliest Christians originally believed. Likewise, it was never an idea expressed on one single page of the Bible, but rather, an idea and a concept that came about much later, after the church came into power and the appointed leaders thought it necessary to control the populace with fear and threats of divine punishment. And yet, it is now a staple in Christian theology, and the number one selling point among evangelicals. This mythology was a concept that was borrowed from the Greeks, who were likewise influenced by the ancient Egyptians whose ideas about the afterlife and a triune God had spread to Babylon and all of the surrounding regions of the Mediterranean. With the weighing of the heart ceremony, the soul was judged and if found unworthy, would then be cast into the underworld to suffer a myriad of horrible torments until it was annihilated. The theme was passed on to the Greeks and then later personified and popularized by English poets like Dante and Milton during the Middle Ages, and the rest is history. It has been used by religious leaders ever since, to instill fear in the weak-minded, and scare people into being good, but it is a hollow, evil and extremely deceptive concept, that's created more harm than you could ever possibly imagine. As stated, I've been counseling troubled youths since I was 18, and I've spent more time studying the Bible and researching religion and theology than most people do, in a lifetime. I understand it comprehensively, from its original roots in Judaism, and before that, Egyptian and Sumerian mythology, and I know intimately, the real meanings behind every Moadim holiday that my own Jewish family celebrates ignorantly. These, along with every offshoot of every modern-day denomination of Protestantism and Catholicism, along with all of the Hellenistic, Greco-Roman, and Babylonian practices that now define them. I never looked for souls to save, they always ended up coming to me. I didn't ask for it, but I responded to it, because I knew how important it was to educate and help people and I saw the deep and inconsolable need they had for answers and hope. I know how to listen, and I know how to relate, and I have a wealth of scriptural knowledge and personal experience to draw insight from. I've made myself available and I've devoted years to the study of psychology, theology, spirituality and religion. Counseling others comes naturally to me and I end up doing it no matter where I live, or what I'm involved in. I've seen the consequences of abuse and neglect and comforted and consoled the hearts and minds of those who are grieving, those who are in distress, and those who feel lost or abandoned. I say all of this now because in reality, there is no one better qualified to speak on this subject than me. But in the end, it is you who must decide what is best, and what you choose to believe, and where, and from whom, you decide to derive your guidance from. Whether that be a disillusioned and jaded, ex-Christian like me, or a certified historian and scholar. When it comes to Christianity, all I can say is that I hope you come to a point someday, just like I did, where you'll start to realize that the things you've been taught and what you've learned from the mainstream, are only a very minuscule part of a much larger story. Most of it is just plain false, and it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure these things out when carefully considered and examined rationally. An eternal hell, the character of Satan, the exclusivity of Christianity, and Jesus being the one and only way to heaven, they just don't add up, or make any logical sense when you consider the big picture. If you really hunger for truth, you'll see all of this in time, and that's when you'll start to dig deeper and search for the real answers. Without the influence of so many others around you constantly promoting your beliefs, you'll begin to realize the hard truth that so much of what contemporary Christianity follows and practices, is actually incorrect, irrational, outdated, and immoral, with origins, beliefs and practices, that stem from the archaic myths, and legends, of many other cultures and religions. These concepts and ideas have been misunderstood and misinterpreted for centuries by the ignorant masses, seeping into the consciousness of the Jews in the early years. First, through a myriad of pagan influences, and then later by religious leaders in authority who sought to accrue wealth and power and solidify control over a populace, by infiltrating their minds and taking advantage of their gullibility, as has always been the case when it comes to religion. Needless to say, the doctrines, customs and theology of the modern-day church, resembles nothing close to what first-century Christianity was. As you will soon learn, the multiple competing versions of Christianity were not unified by any means, but rather, utterly divided and split into several diverse, and opposing, groups and factions, each with very different interpretations and viewpoints concerning the Messiah, and exactly what a Christian should and should not believe, etc. The biggest influence of all, of course, came from Zoroastrianism, as this is where the Jews picked up all of their eschatology, that is, beliefs about the end of the world. Undeniably, it was the writings of the Apocrypha, during the intertestamental period, while the Jews were in captivity, and were heavily influenced by Persian and Babylonian religions, that formed the basis for most, if not all, of what people today believe about the monotheistic God of Christianity and Judaism. The whole concept of a single, all-powerful, righteous God of justice, and light, and an all-evil, God of darkness and corruption, Satan, the themes of an end-time resurrection and a worldwide, final judgment, etc. These all came directly from Zoroastrianism. If you'd like to learn more about this topic, please check out my other ebook, The Origins of Satan, now available to download in digital format as well. As I keep saying over and over, there is more to history than you can imagine, and only those who take the time to study, listen, and see past their own preconceived notions and misconceptions, will be able to grasp it. When it comes to faith and spirituality, it is very much a journey, and you never stop learning. The things you believed when you were younger, are no doubt vastly different from what you believe now, and so it is, with religion and spirituality. It's a process, and it never ends until we die. There is a verse from the New Testament, "Now we see as in a cloudy mirror, but one day we will see Him, face to face. We will know everything, even as we are fully known." Well, there is some truth to that. And anyone who says they've got it all figured out right now is lying to themselves and probably has the furthest to go. Open your mind, do the research, seek answers, and look outside of your own established dogma. There is so much more to the world than just Christianity. Learn to think for yourself, don't allow others to force their beliefs onto you when it comes to religion, and similarly, please do not attempt to force your beliefs onto others. Don't conform to what anyone tells you, but follow your own heart and mind, and the wisdom that comes from experience. Learn how to be wise in the world and make the right decisions based on common decency, and the innate understanding we all have of what is right and what is wrong. Step back and have faith that if you seek truth above all things and pursue the highest good, you will find the answers and a clear and righteous path will emerge. Above all, figure out what you believe first, before you try to push it onto others. You might find out down the road, that much of what you thought was true, was really based on a lie, and you'll have wasted precious time because your focus was on saving souls, instead of just living an authentic life, and being a good person. As I touched on earlier, I've also been involved in several unofficial counseling programs, helping troubled youths and adults alike, with substance abuse problems, teaching and promoting abstinence and moderation, and encouraging those negatively affected, to quit using drugs and stay clean and sober. Likewise, I've spent the better part of my life ministering to those who are lost, or broken, due to childhood trauma, parental abuse, or neglect, and the emotionally and psychologically damaging consequences of indoctrination and brainwashing, from all of these oppressive, Abrahamic religions. Showing generosity, love, kindness and compassion, to both humans and non-human animals alike, I have labored and fought, devoted all of my time and energy, acting tirelessly as a kind of therapist to many loved ones and friends, as well as all those who happened to cross my path who were emotionally unstable, suffering anxiety and depression, or were generally dysfunctional or maladjusted in some way, and I've been doing this, almost continuously, for the last 20 years. I've worked with famous people and I've been homeless. I've hung out with movie stars and I've spent time in a mental hospital. I've eaten at the fanciest restaurants and I've struggled to make ends meet. I've traveled up and down the East Coast and I've journeyed back and forth from east to west several times, and even stayed overseas in Israel for a spell, all in search of wisdom, enlightenment, and the purported insight derived from many of the world's most ancient spiritual traditions. On top of all of this, I also read, research, study, and write about these things daily as well. All of that being said, let it be known, I'm no mystic, and within the pantheist community, I lean much more toward atheism and secular humanism than some of my more abstract and mystically focused contemporaries, who will swear by the teachings of Aldous Huxley, Alan Watts, and Terence McKenna. Although I find great inspiration and insight in these men and all their various writings, in truth, because of my staunch skepticism, I don't always agree with everything they say, or subscribe to their reinterpretations of traditional religion. As I feel in some cases, their views may be skewed, or limited, when it comes to their knowledge of history, especially biblical history. My heroes are more along the lines of Nikola Tesla, Albert Einstein, Carl Sagan, John Muir, Henry David Thoreau, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Jane Goodall, Marty Stauffer, Steve Irwin, Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens and the like. Personally, I know that we should follow science and only believe in what is verifiable, what is demonstrably proven, and what can be tested and observed. We should follow our own intelligence, follow our hearts, and follow our gut instincts when it comes to decision making in life, but when it comes to matters of ontology and spirituality, we should only believe in, and promote, what is valid and what is true, what is provable and what is genuinely authentic, based on evidence, common sense, sound logic, and reason. None of this implies that I am closed-minded or that I operate under a strictly reductionist, empirical mindset. I am not a materialist by any means. Likewise, I know that there is a vast amount of information concerning existence that we are not readily able to access and deduce through our very limited physical senses. And so, I am always open to new theoretical concepts and emergent information, and I believe that imagination, inspiration and intuitive knowledge, also play a vital role in discovering the fundamental truth, when it comes to reality and the natural world. I am open to some New Age concepts, with great interest, among other things, in ancient history, forbidden archaeology, cryptozoology, alternative medicine, holistic health, and psychic phenomena. I have a general knowledge of Eastern mysticism, and I am well acquainted with the practices of transcendental meditation, yoga, Reiki, acupuncture, and more, with a firm understanding of the teachings of Buddhism and Taoism as well, but I am always careful to weed out the woo-woo, and discern between what is fantasy and what is fiction, what is verifiable and what is pseudoscience, what is superstition and what is objective reality, etc. Again, whatever advancements we make in quantum physics or whatever we have yet to discover in terms of any new and emergent characteristics and qualities of the universe, that information will never reinforce or confirm the fallacious belief in any anthropomorphic gods or goddesses, demons or angels, a transcendent supernatural world, or any other primitive concept assumed by the unenlightened, unintelligent, and uninformed collective mindset of ages past. Whatever it is we know now, whatever we think we know, and whatever we've yet to know in the future, however complex or arcane, in the end, will always simply be just another elusive property of nature, that we were yet to fully grasp, comprehend, understand, and express. No need to stretch reality, or exaggerate the truth, or impose any fanciful ideas, simply because we wish them to be so. In this sense, I am, and will always be, a naturalist. Not in a way that I am predisposed or biased to seek naturalistic explanations for miraculous phenomena out of fear or obstinacy, but confident that whatever answers we do uncover, be it extraordinary or mundane, they will never be of supernatural origin, but rather, rightly revealed, in time, to be just another wondrous and unique facet of Mother Nature, that we were yet uneducated about, and unfamiliar with, in the intellectual adolescence of our species. We have much to learn, but in the noble search for truth, purpose, and relevant meaning, I will never condone or promote the melding and mixing of fantasy and delusion, with facts and reality. And this, my friends, is why I am a mythicist, because when all the facts and data are laid before you, and you know and understand for yourself the history, origins, and multifaceted assortment of influences which fueled and perpetuated the myths and legends handed down to us in the Bible, the case becomes clear. The evidence simply does not add up. And, on the contrary, there is a preponderance of evidence that actually works against it, to not only debunk, discredit, dismantle, deconstruct, and obliterate the most common, popularized interpretations, but also widen our understanding of them, giving so much more depth and meaning to the familiar stories. Which, ironically, in itself becomes a kind of gratifying and enriching pleasure, the deeper you go down the rabbit hole and the more you learn, etc. There are layers and layers to this story, and I know that for myself at least, once I moved beyond my initial anger, heartbreak, frustration and disappointment, it soon became a thoroughly engaging and endlessly fascinating journey of discovery. As stated, I only seek to explore the world and spirituality through science and philosophy, using logic, reason, and the information our senses provide. And that means we need to stay grounded, and not be led astray by the idea of other dimensions, and altered states of consciousness. We are born into this reality, we are meant to dwell in this reality. In other words, it is not a prison or a trap that we need to try and escape from. And yet, this is what religions like Christianity teach, and without any qualms or reservation. But to think in this way only leads to apathy and complacency about real-world issues. Or worse, adamant, regressive, moral and political views, fueled by anachronistic attitudes and outdated, archaic, religious thinking. Need I mention the bigoted condemnation of homosexuality and discrimination toward gay people? The fearful aversion, to anything that has the appearance of evil, according to their purest mindsets, or the preoccupation and fixation with moral behavior and the fanatical obsession with having just the right doctrine and beliefs, or the intense guilt over things you do, or don't do, that you believe to be sinful, all of which create an unbalanced and unstable mind, when it comes to the ideas of rewards and punishment, self-denial, and overindulgence. Everything becomes about behavior and performance, and your mind fixates on the moral aspects of every thought, action, word, and emotion, in yourself and in others. You judge yourself and others continuously, by ridiculous standards, comparing everything to your own idealized notions of right and wrong. Some lives are much better than others, some suffer more and some suffer less. Obviously, this is true throughout the animal kingdom as well. But when people suffer more severely, because of our innate ability to imagine and think in abstraction, their minds latch on to these elaborate myths and stories as a way to placate their pain and minimize their grief. This is when escapism into religious ideation occurs, and illusions are fostered and encouraged by those in our surrounding cultures, who are equally self-deluded and misinformed themselves. Similarly, when people are being oppressed, or in need of hope and encouragement, they invariably look to a transcendent reality, to give them a kind of otherworldly expectation, along with the peace and comfort, to quell their fears and anxieties over death. And yet, our focus should be on the here and now, on what is vital and relevant to all earthlings, what is important in relation to the human experience, in our interactions and daily relationships with other animals and the environment. Biological life should be our number one concern, how we treat each other and how we treat the planet, and all of the other trillions of life forms and organisms that we share space and breath with. That is my contention, and that has been my goal from the very beginning. If we wish to explore the mystical and the numinous, let us do so freely and without dogmatic restraint or fear of ridicule, but all information when it comes to anything spiritual should not just be blindly accepted and followed, until there is ample evidence to actually support and authenticate what you are being led to believe. Only then, when it can be verified and confirmed by others, through adequate, trusted, scientific methods and repeatable experiments, should a fantastic claim be accepted or promoted. We live in a world where everything is subjective, but if we don't temper ourselves when it comes to truth, and the histories and origins of our belief systems, we will fall victim to the same kind of magical thinking and illusions as our ancestors. And I don't know about you, but I seek progress and evolution, not regression and a repetition of the failures of our past. The data and facts are all that matter, not the deep-rooted longing to cling to a reassuring fable. We need to move beyond childish fantasies and reject these carefully crafted lies. You must ask yourself, do you actually care about the truth? Or are you content, in naive ignorance, happy and fulfilled, comfortable and secure in your faith? A few quotes to consider. We wish to find the truth, no matter where it lies. But to find the truth, we need imagination and skepticism both. We will not be afraid to speculate, but we will be careful to distinguish speculation from fact. We long for a parent to care for us, to forgive us our errors, to save us from our childish mistakes. But knowledge is preferable to ignorance. Better by far, to embrace the hard truth, than a reassuring fable. The world is so exquisite, with so much love and moral depth, that there is no reason to deceive ourselves with pretty stories for which there's little good evidence. Far better, it seems to me, in our vulnerability, is to look death in the eye and to be grateful every day for the brief but magnificent opportunity that life provides. Carl Sagan. Be not the slave of your own past, plunge into the sublime seas, dive deep, and swim far. You shall come back with new self-respect, with new power, and with an advanced experience, that shall explain and overlook the old. Ralph Waldo Emerson. Pointing to another world, will never stop vice among us. Only shedding light over this world can alone help us. Walt Whitman. Chapter 4. Regarding the Jesus myth. First off, let me just throw a few facts out there and try to summarize in a very truncated way why historical accuracy in this area is so important to me. Please observe. Number 1, there are numerous internal evidences that definitively prove that the original Gospel, Mark, was actually a literary fabrication, built upon and added to, successively, by the later Gospel writers, and then deliberately projected back into history, by Roman authorities, and used as a tool to unite and promote the growing cult of Christianity and validate the movement, by giving it a historical basis with a real flesh and blood founder, who actually lived and walked the earth, etc. Number 2, the way in which this religion was used and how it subsequently evolved and developed historically, shows the telltale signs of political motivation on all sides, with a governing purpose and plainly socio-religious intent in mind, among other things, that pushed for a universal faith that could be embraced and accepted by all. In an effort to consolidate power and unify the Roman Empire under one banner, a popular myth was literalized and made canon. Number 3, the Jesus story reeks of cross-cultural contamination, borrowing from many previous legends and other fictional religious figures, meeting all the criteria for the hero's journey motif, as outlined in the writings of the great mythologist, Joseph Campbell. There is also a mountain of evidence that points to the first Gospel being a kind of rewrite of the Homeric Greek epics, the Odyssey and the Iliad, from which the author derived much of their inspiration, as they sought to create their own personified epic, involving a Jewish Messiah. In its early days, there was no unified consensus about what was considered orthodox in terms of beliefs and practices, and this is because there was never an actual founder present, to solidify the religion as a cohesive movement, no eyewitness accounts of the purported events and miracles that supposedly occurred, and no written documents that recorded the actions or the words of the fabled teacher from Nazareth, as all of these came much later. If you doubt any of this or you'd like to learn more about the evidence that confirms these facts, feel free to explore all of the reference links at the end of this book. This was a composite character, a chimera, of 100 assorted influences and ideas, that only began to codify and take shape, as the written stories were historicized, and injected back into the not-so-distant past by the Roman Church. There were multiple competing factions, a wide array of variant beliefs surrounding the concept, depending on what part of the Middle East you were from and which interpretation of the Jesus myth you accepted. Schisms and ideological differences were everywhere, and no one could agree on anything. Each sect fought bitterly with the other over who Jesus was, what he did, what he taught, the nature of his incarnation, his divinity, and the meanings and ramifications of his sacrifice. All of these, along with many other conflicts and disputes in doctrine and theology, that spawned a multitude of divergent sects, with Manichaeists, Marcionites, Mandaists, Fabianites, Encratites, Ebionites, Docetists and Gnostics being among them, just to name a few. Feel free to research all of these various sects yourself, and learn about what each of them believed, and how they perpetually clashed and opposed one another, from the 1st century onward. And so, as far as the life and teachings and character of Jesus goes, you must understand, it was really just a very clever amalgam, drawing inspiration from several real historical figures, combined with a deliberate, and systematic, rewrite, of the deeds and exploits of all of the most famous Old Testament Jewish prophets and patriarchs, Moses, Joshua, Elijah, Elisha, etc., all in an attempt to craft a legitimate origin story that could then be used as an authoritative basis for one version of Christianity. As stated, there were numerous warring factions that existed at this time. Everything you read in the Gospels was a much later construct, deliberately manufactured and fashioned with a specific audience, purpose, and intention in mind, often to combat, or refute, other opposing sects. Likewise, what most do not realize is that the Gospels were actually written after Christianity had already been birthed and had begun to develop, at least 60 to 70 years after. Of all the epistles you find in the New Testament, there is no mention of a virgin birth, or an earthly crucifixion. No mention of any of the famous miracles, the empty tomb, or even any of the parables and teachings that would later be ascribed to Jesus. Over and over Paul cites a spiritual resurrection, and a heavenly Jesus, not an earthly, physical incarnation. And yet, modern Christians teach that Jesus Christ will one day return to earth physically to rule the world. Those who ignore or reject God's provision for atonement will be held responsible for the decision that they made in this life to refuse His one and only way of salvation. They will be judged and condemned to eternal separation from God, in a conscious state of torment that will be everlasting. Wonderful, but is there actually any truth to any of this? Is there any real evidence of these things? Nope, not in the slightest. How can I be so confident? Well, in short, the Jesus myth was, and is, a carefully contrived metaphorical, allegorical, personification, of a concept that was already being venerated and believed in, for many years. That is, the idea of a spiritual or heavenly savior, that included the dying and rising, God-man motif, a common theme in nearly all of the pagan mystery cults that were popular at the time, which also included a good dose of astrotheology as well. A figure, who symbolically represented the sun, and Israel, and the destruction of the temple, along with the new Hellenized Jewish cult that had formulated around the idea. A character, who never actually lived on the earth, or was born, in the original mythology. But rather, conducted all of his work in the spiritual, heavenly realms. It was a Judaized version of a pagan mystery cult, similar to the Roman cult of Mithras, and this is another reason why it caught on and spread so fast. This fictional story, originally written by the anonymous author of the oldest and shortest Gospel of Mark, ended up becoming the basis for all of the later revisions and retcons that were to come. At one time there were 88 Gospels, including the Synoptic Gospels of Matthew and Luke, which came much later, and were simply retellings, or updates, of that first initial story found in Mark, with the original version not even featuring a post-crucifixion resurrection scene, opting instead to leave the whereabouts of Jesus' body unknown, in a kind of open-ended cliffhanger of sorts. These subsequent rewrites took the original epic and sought to update and improve the story, by expounding on it and adding more details and more elaborate content with each successive revision. This was done by other, anonymous authors, who used the personified, allegorical tale told in Mark, along with the Septuagint, as a basis for their own, updated versions, replete with all kinds of fulfilled prophecy, that were literally written into the story. All in an effort to make this fictional character the physical embodiment of the Jewish Messiah that was expected to come. If you're unfamiliar, the Septuagint was the Greek version of the Old Testament that nearly all Roman poets, scholars and authors had access to at the time. We know that this is what was used in building the life of Jesus, because of the internal evidence. The Septuagint being referenced is one clue to understanding why these were not literal events from history, but a fictional account, that was formulated and put together using the Greek document, as evidenced by certain key words, and passages that diverge from the original Hebrew text, with a specific language and vocabulary used in these Gospels, especially in Matthew, that were unique to the Septuagint, with several forced prophecies and combining errors and mistakes that can be found in the story, based on this understanding alone. This original, yet unoriginal, myth, which was in fact known and understood by all at the time to be allegorical, and a clever personification of what one sect of Christians initially believed, was later projected back into history, in order to give credence and validity to one particular version of the rapidly growing cult, and legitimize their specific interpretation of Christianity. This was the version that eventually won out, as it was adopted by Constantine, and went on to become the official state religion of the Roman Empire. As stated, there are numerous internal evidences within the story itself which make it clear that none of it was original, or written as an eyewitness account of actual history. And most certainly, none of it was ever meant to be taken literally. This is obvious by the many absurdities that can be found throughout, which only begin to make sense when understood allegorically, metaphorically, and symbolically. The Jesus myth was more of an epic, passion play of sorts, in the same style and format of Homer's Odyssey and the Iliad, with specific elements and motifs taken directly from those renowned Greek epics, that were reworked and retooled, in alignment with Hellenized Jewish and Roman culture. Even the teachings themselves are not original, but taken from many different sources, including various Eastern traditions, with teachings lifted from the Tao Te Ching, and elements of the life of Buddha and Krishna being among them, with a passive, acquiescent, turn the other cheek and pay your taxes attitude and mentality toward the Roman authorities, that was deliberately written in order to make the followers within the populace, less rebellious and easier to dominate and control, with all of the focus and emphasis centered on a heavenly kingdom that was yet to come. Despite what you may think, there is absolutely no solid, concrete, historical evidence that the character ever existed in reality, but mountains of evidence that lead one to believe he was actually a composite of several different characters and themes instead. Similarly, there are no eyewitness records from any extra biblical source to verify a real person, only a rapidly growing movement that began at least 70 to 100 years after the supposed events took place. Every account has been debunked, either due to forgery and redaction, or later tampering with the text, as in the case of Josephus. Most are just spurious references that only represent hearsay or a general description of the cult itself and its beliefs. Yet, these only occur many years after it was already up and running. As stated, the Roman authorities at the time, led by Constantine, used this fictional tale as a way to authenticate one particular sect of Christianity and unite the empire under a single, state religion. This later evolved to become the all-powerful, Roman Catholic Church, which used its strength and authority to amass hordes of wealth, consolidate power, and essentially conquer the world through military might, and by assimilating all of the rituals, customs, symbology, and existing festivals of the pagan cultures who fell beneath their boot. They did this of course in order to make it easier to convert those they were proselytizing who were reluctant to give up their long-standing pagan traditions. The sordid origins of Christianity represent an extremely long, complex, and multi-layered history. Yet it was all founded on a very elaborate, glorified myth. Creatively conceived to personify and communicate a combined set of beliefs, that were used and appropriated by certain rulers for political reasons, and now in modern times, is incessantly propagated by deceitful and corrupt religious leaders, and the ignorant masses that follow them, who have no real working knowledge of history, and lack any logical discernment or critical thinking skills, and are all too eager to simply trust, obey, and swallow the proverbial Kool-Aid. It would take far too long to try and explain and deconstruct the multifaceted origins of Christianity in a single essay, or short ebook, but what I will do for you instead, is provide what I call the 13 keys to Christianity, which, in essence, are 13 interrelated subjects or elements of history, the study of which has the power to completely and irrevocably unravel, debunk, deconstruct, discredit, and dismantle all of mainstream Western religion as you know it. Suffice to say, these 13 things have done more to influence and shape Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, than you can imagine, and all one need do to comprehend the true origins of these religions, is study and learn about these specific subjects, and everything will begin to unravel and the truth will soon become clear. They are as follows. 1. Sumerian mythology. 2. Egyptian mythology. 3. The Books of Enoch. 4. Zoroastrianism. 5. The Apocrypha. 6. The Essenes. 7. Paganism. 8. Mithraism. 9. Flavius Josephus. 10. The Tao Te Ching. 11. The Homeric Epics. 12. Apollonius of Tyana. 13. Emperor Constantine. Am I adamant about proving the non-existence of a historical Jesus? Absolutely. Because as long as the idea persists, his words and actions will continue to be idolized and touted as some kind of ultimate authority, and the subsequent theologies and doctrines connected with the character will continue to be believed. Which then gives rise to all manner of emotional and psychological control and manipulation, by those who know how to use the story and the popularized theologies associated with it, to gain worldly wealth and power. Most religious leaders, both presently and historically, have only ever been concerned about themselves, and how they can benefit from the promotion of these antiquated, but enduring myths, and all at the expense of the gullible and brainwashed masses, who are too ignorant of history, to see through the lies, and discern what is, without a doubt, an extraordinarily massive deception. A few quotes to consider. Many currents fed the Jesus myth, much like streams and tributaries joining to form a major river. As Christianity cut its way through the centuries, it became a very murky and dangerous torrent, sweeping away civilizations and all who stood in its way. With ruthless ambition, and by enforcing an ideology of sin and redemptive sacrifice, Christian clerics enslaved the Mediterranean world. Kenneth Humphreys. I would argue that the Jesus of the Gospels is essentially a myth. The Gospels are largely fiction. They were created around the turn of the 1st and 2nd century in order to give concreteness and substance to the Jesus who, as the Messiah, had appeared to Paul and his fellow apostles in ecstatic visions. Alvar, L. Gore. Chapter 5. Regarding religion in general. Everything I've been saying may be hard for many to understand and accept, but it's only because we've been raised in a culture predominantly influenced by theism, and particularly, by Judeo-Christian monotheism, an outlook that reflects a personified, highly personalized, human-like God. And, in the case of the Father aspect of the Godhead, complete with all the nasty and unfavorable qualities, and character traits, that could also be found in your average human, yet glorified, and believed to be perfect in all aspects as well. Of course they would deny it and say that God is bigger, smarter, more powerful and greater than any human being, and yet, according to the Bible, when it comes to personality, character and attitude, this divine being, behaves exactly like a jealous and capricious monarch, or earthly king of the past, and oftentimes, like a spoiled, petulant child, who throws massive tantrums when he doesn't get his own way. Likewise, if you are following the creation accounts and cosmology of Judaism, laid out in the book of Genesis, you are essentially embracing an extremely primitive, Bronze Age view of the world, that is in many ways outdated, archaic, and incongruent with everything that we now know about modern science, astronomy, biology and physics. There are absurdities in the Bible that cannot be reconciled, horrendous acts of cruelty and violence towards others that are 100% sanctioned and condoned by God. Immoral behavior, to both humans and animals, that most would be shocked and appalled to learn. Yet through cherry-picking and selective abstraction, rationalization and emotional reasoning, these things go unscrutinized and are perpetually overlooked and ignored. Now, I've studied theology and religion for a long time and I think it's safe to say, I'm extremely familiar with all forms of theism, including progressive and conservative, Catholic and Protestant, Orthodox and liberal. And there is much that could be said about the lack of credible evidence that exists to support any of the outrageous claims that religions have made over the centuries. This is not just an arbitrary opinion, on the contrary, I speak from personal experience, with the knowledge and insight of someone, who once took all of these claims very seriously. As I explained earlier, before discovering pantheism, I was a born-again, Bible-believing, evangelical Christian myself. I've spent an inordinate amount of time in religious circles, engaged in religious activities and surrounded by religious people of all shapes and variety. Starting with those same life-changing experiences that occurred when I was 16, I went on to study theology on my own, and then later at Bible college, familiarizing myself with all manner of beliefs and doctrine, working at a religious bookstore, fellowshipping with other believers, and taking part in both corporate and private worship and devotion. This continued for several years, attending various Bible studies, being involved in a number of different ministries, outreach programs, and a whole plethora of church-related events and activities as well. I've talked to scores of people, read a slew of books, gone to hundreds of services, listened to thousands of hours of Christian radio programs, researched comprehensively through books and via the internet, sought out answers with all of my heart, studied profusely, searched long and far, prayed endlessly and devoted myself, and my life, entirely and completely, to the all-encompassing pursuit of understanding and experiencing God. And now, after 20+ years of contemplation, meditation, and continuous and persistent exploration, I'm here to tell you, God is not what you think. This may be hard to hear if you are traditionally Jewish, Catholic, or Christian. This includes most of my family on both sides, but let me ask you a question: why do you believe what you believe? Is it because it makes sense in a logical, rational, and coherent way, and it's what all the evidence points to? Or is it because you were raised with this religious attitude and it is simply a family tradition that was handed down to you from your parents? Could it be that you are only a Christian, Muslim, or Jew because of the current popularity of that particular belief system, at this particular time in history? Similarly, could it be because you just so happen to live in a geographic location where this is a common religious tradition? I wonder, does it make sense to allow your beliefs and philosophies, beliefs that affect everything you do and influence your views on everything from politics to morality, to your ideas about an afterlife? Beliefs that were literally imposed on you by your surrounding culture, beliefs you essentially inherited from others, who likewise inherited it from their parents and family, etc. Does it make sense to allow these beliefs to now define who you are, and the very purpose of your existence, and dictate and control how you view the world, and how you conduct yourself and behave? Does it make sense to allow this to be wholly left up to the simple fact that you were born in a society, in a certain geographic location, and during a certain time period, that just so happens to promote and endorse your particular faith? As I touched on earlier, had you been born in India, you would likely be a Hindu. Had you been born in Iraq, you would most certainly be Muslim. But since you were born in Europe or America, you are a Christian or a Jew. The same could be said about any culture or society, throughout all of history. Religion is simply an uncontrollable, unforeseeable, consequence of time, tradition, family heritage, and geography. Allow me to elaborate further. For most people who profess a religious belief, their faith is accidental, a product of time, physical geography, and personal circumstances. Even the most zealous Christian fundamentalist, had they been born 3,000 years ago, in Egypt, would have probably ended up worshipping the true deity, or deities, that were acceptable at the time. A contemporary Muslim extremist, no matter how faithful to Allah, currently, would have worshipped an Aztec or Mayan pantheon of gods, had he or she been living just a few centuries ago in Central America. And the same could be said of any conservative Jew. If they were born in ancient Mesopotamia, they would be worshipping the Anunnaki. Or had they lived during the time of the Vikings in Scandinavia, they'd be believing in Thor, Odin, Loki, Frigg, and the rest of the Nordic gods that were popular in Germanic paganism and folklore at that time. And yet, With each of these various mythologies, the adherents no doubt believed that theirs, and only theirs, was the one true faith, and the absolute truth, constituting the highest form of wisdom and spiritual awareness. Silly, isn't it? And so, as far back as you want to go, religious affiliation is simply a matter of geography and societal norms, and the same could be said of today. The only difference is, nowadays we actually have a choice. You see, for most of human history, there was generally little to no control over what you believed. This is especially pertinent when you consider the pious attitudes of exclusivity found in the various doctrines of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Are you aware that there have always been certain countries, even whole nations, where beliefs and creeds are continually forced upon people, as they are, through no fault of their own, born into very strict, traditionalized systems of caste and culture, stemming back hundreds of thousands of years? Especially in third world countries, where so many are conceived in poverty and raised in the poorest living conditions, and are perpetually trapped under social and economic oppression, with little or no education outside of their particular tribe, community, or ethnic group, and certainly no means to educate themselves concerning other philosophies and alternative methods of thinking. No, my friends, the freedom of religion is a fairly new concept. And many people could lose all of their rights and property, indeed, even their very lives, if they refuse to conform and submit to their country's officially established religion. And yet here in America, we are taught that Jesus Christ is our divine hero, the Savior of all mankind. If you're Jewish, substitute Jesus for Moses, or the Messiah you believe is still yet to come. In Islamic traditions, it would be Muhammad. But other cultures have had entirely different saviors, worshipping and serving entirely different gods and goddesses, with their own medley of prophets, wise men and gurus, who are all considered the official spokesman for the one true God. And yet, all of these belief systems also contradict one another, and the distinctions and disparities between their doctrines have caused more war, violence, chaos, and bloodshed, than any other aspect of human culture that has ever existed. When accurately assessed, the untold suffering and discord produced by the three Abrahamic religions alone is enough to make your heart sick with grief and your mind reel with disgust. And yet, most consider religion a force for good in the world. Many believe it is literally the source of our morality and ethics. This naive sentiment could not be further from the truth. I wonder how much history those who think this way have actually studied, and how deeply they've considered these things with an open heart and an unbiased mind. Whatever the case, whether they be good, or evil, it could be said with all confidence that religious beliefs and convictions are simply a byproduct of the culture in which one lives. Had we been raised in a different culture, we would have heard the stories of a very different Savior, instead of the popular and widely accepted story of Jesus. Upon my own studies and comparisons of the various myths and stories of other saviors and God-men of old, there are literally hundreds, mind you, I have found that the similarities between them are so numerous and striking, it is obvious that they are more than just coincidences. The parallels, and overlapping motifs, and reoccurring themes are plain, and the answer is quite clear: either they have all come from the same divine source, in which case it is humans who are wholly to blame for continuously and perpetually misunderstanding, misinterpreting and misrepresenting the message. Or, they are all products of a deeper human need. An invention of human beings, whether intentional or not, to answer the unanswerable questions, to give us hope in our darkest hour, to keep us believing in something unseen, that is transcendent, greater than us, and, beyond. And in doing so, help us carry on, through our most difficult struggles. The human condition is universal, we all experience the same doubts, fears, hopes and desires. We all suffer the same disappointments, and losses and heartbreaks, and yearn for something more than this life. We all long to find purpose and meaning and make sense out of things that happen. Religion provides the solution to all of this. Moreover, when most of the religions I've been referencing were established, it was a time of unimaginable chaos and tumultuous instability. The human race was young, uncivilized, and constantly at war, over land, resources, and other more petty and unwarranted contentions. The people and cultures of antiquity were pushed to their limits in order to survive. Nature was cruel, life was a constant struggle, and existence was fearful and fleeting. The weather and environment presented relentless obstacles and challenges, conditions were continuously harsh and humans were ruthless, barbaric, and petty. The future was uncertain, and brutal struggles for power, dominance, governing superiority, resources, land, and territory, were a constant threat to all and an unfortunate reality. And so, there arose at various times, a need for consolation, order, peace, and stability. In accordance with the natural human curiosity about the world around us and the nature of existence, religions were designed and perpetuated in order to guarantee tribal authority and social influence, quell the doubts and fears of an insecure people, obtain and maintain resources and wealth, and eventually, establish political power and control. These were the original motivations for the manufacturing of religion. And along with this and at the same time, they also duly served to curb and discourage any destabilizing or destructive behavior, and deter any unwanted chaos or incivility that might threaten the burgeoning power structures that were beginning to take shape. It was in this way that religion acted as a primitive form of crowd control, complete with its own built-in, psychological and emotional system of checks and balances, involving ethics and morality, that promoted and discouraged, both good and evil behavior. It did this, by placing all of the emphasis on both earthly, and, eternal, rewards and punishments, with an inherent, dependency, upon the religious institutions and the established priesthood for, guidance, wisdom, and imaginary salvation from an invented spiritual disease, and in the cases of those with greater conscience and character, the absolution of guilt and shame. Think about it, nearly all theologies center around the ideas of rewards and punishment, either in this life, or with the introduction of the ultra-motivating aspect of an exceedingly elaborate and exaggerated system of rewards and punishments in the next. To my Jewish friends and family, please consider, there may be many things that you agree with in your religion, in terms of morality and ethics, etc., which are then confirmed for you in your life, and in so doing, strengthen and reinforce what you already believe. But perhaps it is only because you believed in these things first, that you now view the world through the lens of a traditional Jew. To my Christian friends and family, I admonish you to consider the same thing. There may be many things that have occurred in your life since your childhood, or from the time when you were first baptized, or born again. These events and circumstances have no doubt reinforced and strengthened your faith and influenced and persuaded you to continue believing in this way. But have you never stopped to consider the fact that everything that has happened to you, that you perceived as the workings of God in your life, was only interpreted the way that it was by you, because you already had that same predetermined bias? As I explained earlier, whatever religious system or worldview you are brought up with and exposed to, creates a cognitive filter, through which you then automatically end up seeing the world. And of course, because all religions deal with human existence and all of the aforementioned universal concepts and themes, they each provide an origin story, a justification for evil, a motivation to be good, and an elaborate explanation for everything you see all around you, and everything that happens to you personally. I wonder, if you were raised as a Native American somewhere in pre-colonial North America in the early 1600s, what your worldview would be. Animism, ancestor worship, the Great Spirit, etc. Needless to say, all of your collective experiences would have a very different meaning, had you not believed in whatever particular doctrine you believed in ahead of time. Therefore, it is really the circumstances you find yourself in, that determine what your religious beliefs are. So my question to you is, should not our philosophy, our ontology, our epistemology, that is, our beliefs concerning our morality, our ethics, and our spirituality, be absolutely based on something that is unchangeable, timeless and consistent, no matter who you are, or where you are from? For those who would point to the Bible, the Tanakh, the Torah, and the Quran, please remember, those collections of writings were written thousands of years ago, and organized and compiled for obvious social and political reasons. And, as I've been explaining, there are much older writings that have very similar stories, from which it is now definitively known, that they were all drawn from, and inspired by. With Homer's Odyssey and the Iliad being the blueprint for the popular gospel story of Jesus in the New Testament, and the Enuma Elish and the Epic of Gilgamesh being the basis for the Old Testament creation accounts found in Genesis as well. All of these, along with ancient Egyptian writings and Zoroastrian theology and eschatology, also contributing and playing their part as major influences, just to name a few. In other words, there is no reason to value one above the other, simply because there is some truth contained within your particular belief system, predetermined bias, remember? Contrary to popular belief, Christianity is a relatively new religion when you consider the entire scope of human existence. The fact is, about 24% of all Americans consider themselves to be atheists or religious skeptics of some kind. 6% of these people, agnostics, admit to having no religion at all. They do not attend services at any church, synagogue, temple, or mosque. They are not involved with any organized religion on a regular basis, except perhaps on a few annual holidays, to keep up appearances for the sake of friends and relatives. Taken together, that's over 75 million Americans, not looking to religion for a moral code, teachers, doctors, lawyers, policemen, technicians, authors, artists, etc. These are well-educated, intelligent, contributing members of our society, whose ethics stem from a completely secular philosophy of life. They follow political events, pay their taxes, vote, volunteer at shelters, and give to charities. No, religion is not necessary to keep one moral. If anything, history teaches us that some of the craziest, most unstable people, are those compelled by their religious convictions. Wherever you see fanatics and extremism, at its core, you will always find religious thinking. Should I mention the state of affairs in the Middle East and the hundreds of suicide bombers driven to kill themselves and others in the name of Allah? To these and so many more down through history, religion has been used as a tool, to enslave their minds and control their thoughts and actions, stripping the individual of all their rights and personal freedom, to serve a higher calling, grossly distorting their view of reality and smothering their ability to use common sense, or think for themselves. Through the crippling fear of eternal torment, or the equally misleading promise of heavenly rewards, human beings will lose sight of all logic and reason. And this, is the danger of religion. The most vile, and despicable things ever done to human beings and animals, have always been done in the name of religion. Using sacred documents and religious writings as their basis, evil men in positions of authority have persecuted, tortured, and murdered, untold millions while simultaneously brainwashing, deceiving and subjugating millions more. Contrary to its intent, the belief in God myths have brought misery, suppression of critical thought, and much violence and cruelty. Though in some cases many of their founders no doubt had good intentions initially and the most noble and inspired ideas, and although much charity and good work may have been accomplished through them, nevertheless, many of the world's most popular religions, both presently and historically, in reality, have only served to propagate hate and intolerance, ignorance, guilt, and fear. Stifling the natural human ability to think and reason, to question and inquire, to explore oneself and the world around them openly, and experience life in a rational, optimistic, and liberating way. This has been the real outcome of traditional theism and fundamentalist Middle Eastern and Western religions. I declare to you, that the human race no longer needs these ancient stories and myths of old, to survive and function. Just as little children grow up and learn the truth about the existence of the Tooth Fairy and Santa Claus, the human race needs to mature and learn the truth about the non-existence of the theist God. Not from Bible thumpers or gurus, not in temples or churches, not through books or doctrines based on ancient writings, that were deliberately fabricated, or subjectively written, by corrupt human hands, and read and interpreted falsely by greedy or obsessed religious leaders. But each person individually, from whatever inner requirements they might have, that would genuinely motivate and inspire them to do so, at whatever time in their lives as it becomes necessary, and within whatever time frame, as is needed, to the highest degree that they are able, should diligently and earnestly, seek the truth above all things, and not stop until all the answers are found. Not because of peer pressure, not for fear of others' judgment, not out of any kind of guilt, or threat of damnation, and not because of the expectations of selfish friends or family members, but for the very real need, and earnest desire, within each one of us to experience and know the truth, all should resolve themselves to engage in this journey. For whether God is indeed a reality or not, all religions hold some truth, yet all religions to some degree have also caused enormous amounts of pain and suffering. Therefore, whether there exists a supreme being or not, and whether there is an ultimate, absolute truth, I know in my heart of hearts, that the religions of this world that currently exist, have never been, and will never be, the right way to understand and experience it. A few quotes to consider. Religion has ever been anti-human, anti-woman, anti-life, anti-peace, anti-reason, and anti-science. The God idea has been detrimental, not only to humankind, but to the earth. It is time now for reason, education, and science to take over. Madeline Murray O'Hare. I cannot imagine a God who rewards and punishes the objects of his creation, whose purposes are modeled after our own, a God, in short, who is but a reflection of human frailty. Neither can I believe that the individual survives the death of his body, although feeble souls harbor such thoughts through fear, or ridiculous egotism. Albert Einstein. Chapter 6. The Nature of Religion. And so, the question arises. What is the right way? What is the good, proper, and correct avenue for pursuing spirituality? If religion is indeed a faulty system, and fundamentally flawed on so many levels, what are we to look to instead? How do we obtain the truth? And where can the answers to all of life's ultimate questions really be found? Well, what one thing has always been, and will always be, universally accessible, and perpetually available, to all people, at all times, everywhere. The answer is simple. Nature. The natural world that surrounds us is all we need and all we will ever need to commune with the divine and reach our highest potential as a species. The mountains and the streams and the rocks and the trees and the forests and the beaches and all of life that exists under the sky and on the earth and in the oceans, together with every natural process of organic and inorganic matter that occurs on our planet and in our universe. This, and this only, is what has always been with us. This, and this only, is what was, is, and always will be, readily available to everyone, everywhere, no matter who they are, or where they are, or what time period they happen to be living in. Do not misunderstand. The patterns and systems of plants and animals and every biological function that surrounds us perpetually, need not be worshipped or venerated, only understood and emulated. The cosmic forces that govern our lives, and sustain all life on Earth, have always, and will always, be with us to teach us, guide us, and provide us with everything we need for existence. The movements of the heavenly bodies, the operations of our own physical bodies, the life cycles of nature, and the patterns of the seasons, all hold more relevant truth, more beauty, more wisdom and knowledge and instruction, than any religious book, or school, or doctrine, that man could ever devise. As far as humans are concerned, the universe is divine, and all we could ever hope for or want lies in the scientific study and analysis of its properties. The pagans had it right, they just didn't have the knowledge to see the real causes behind things, so they created myths and stories that they could understand, remember, and relate to, in order to explain natural processes. Just as the ancient pagans and Druids did historically, and modern Wiccans do presently, they deified the great heroes of old, selected specific human beings, and animals, that had admirable traits and qualities, and made them into gods, in order to maintain some level of association and understanding with things that were beyond their control, things they couldn't possibly fathom. To their credit, they joyously celebrated the seasons and the life cycles of nature, and recognized our interdependence and interconnection with the earth. They lived off the land and valued and appreciated much of what we take for granted today. But because they did not have the benefit of scientific knowledge, over time, they attached superstition and ritual, mystifying those naturally occurring events and phenomena that were outside of their ability to grasp. They glorified various characteristics of nature, together with certain aspects of humanity, personifying all of these into individual gods and goddesses that they could relate to, pray to, sacrifice to, and petition, all in hopes of receiving blessings and favors, help and assistance in times of need. Religion was their sincere attempt at trying to explain what was to them unexplainable. It was a way to make sense out of tragedy and give themselves hope and the motivation to endure certain hardships, have peace about certain injustices, and justify their own wanton behavior as well. And so, where do we stand now? Thankfully, further along than our ancestors. Unless we continue to revert back to primitive superstition, and rely on mystical explanations, for naturally occurring events and processes. Which will it be? Aside from a plethora of unverified, inconclusive, paranormal phenomena, which itself is always subject to a great deal of predisposed, emotional slants, cultural biases and misinterpretations, there has never been any concrete evidence that anything exists beyond this life, or outside of this physical reality. There are no hardcore facts or documented proofs to sustain anything that any religion has ever claimed, when it comes to a supernatural world, or an afterlife. All we have are stories, myths and legends, passed down from generation to generation, documented and recorded in holy books like the Bible, the Tanakh, the Quran, the Zabur, the Vedas, the Gita, etc., but solidified and perpetuated by the deep-rooted longings and desires of humanity, for all of these things to actually be true. Theologies and belief systems, that once accepted, become the basis for everything that is then subjectively experienced. This is an incredible travesty and an absolute hindrance to really discovering the truth on any level. For everything that happens to a person, whether internal or external, can no longer be understood or experienced objectively, but instead becomes biased, due to their indoctrination, because once a religion is embraced, individuals are naturally predisposed to attribute all events, big or small, to the characters and forces that exist within that particular worldview, or belief system. It is psychosomatic and self-fulfilling to the core, a manufactured delusion, that only persists because of the all-encompassing nature of the belief system itself, and humanity's deep-rooted need for answers, consolation, and hope. How can we ever break free from this cycle? Our culture is saturated with Judeo-Christian ideology, imagery and language. We are constantly bombarded with religious influences, indoctrination and brainwashing that begins at the earliest age, and continues on throughout life. In this way, whatever good religion has sought to do, it simultaneously undoes, as it separates, alienates, and divides. How many wars fought, how many families torn apart and lives lost, over things that cannot even be substantiated or proven. It's insanity. And there has to be another way, and fortunately for us, there is. More on this later. But the question must be put to rest, once and for all. Is there an all-knowing, all-powerful, all-loving, conscious, coherent, intelligent, benevolent, infinite and immortal being, that interacts with us and has our best interest in mind? This is what theism teaches, but is there any evidence for this? If what I just described is being claimed by someone, then they need to provide demonstrable evidence for it and explain its nature and show the proof that something like this is in fact a reality. After all, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, as Carl Sagan once said. Otherwise, they're just talking about ideas, personifications, metaphors, myths and legends, and thus, they should aptly be treated as such. These things do exist, and have existed, for thousands of years, and they indeed instigate many powerful thoughts and emotions, and motivate and inspire both good and evil deeds, but they are only real in an abstract sense, no more real than Superman, Spider-Man, or Gandalf. And if that's what someone is talking about, mythology, folklore, personification, fiction, etc., then they need to clarify and acknowledge their idea as a myth or metaphor, because at the same exact time, in a parallel way, we've also got millions of people all around the world, who believe the fictional characters of the Bible actually existed, or exist right now, in a very literal sense. And this is utterly misleading to them, and to their children, not to mention a major hindrance to others like myself, who are trying so desperately to define reality and set the record straight when it comes to spirituality, and come to definitive conclusions, in terms of what is real, and what is not, etc. Is there a disembodied, omniscient, supernal, cosmic, higher intelligence looking out for us, as your average theist would have us believe? No, there is not. For if there was, there would be no pain and suffering in the world. Thinking in this way is not representative of pantheism, but of theism, an unhealthy, delusional belief system that only leads to unrealistic expectations, disappointment, and distorted thinking. The damnable notion of a personal, supreme, interactive deity has been perpetuated by religions and religious institutions for centuries, having first been theorized and projected onto the natural world in ignorance, and later used as a means to instill fear and control others. Imposed and enforced through authoritarianism and violence, the threat of imprisonment, torture, and unimaginable cruelty and oppression. This is the true legacy of theism. This time period lasted roughly between 500 to 1500 CE, and it was known as the Dark Ages for a reason. The monastic order and the papacy controlled nearly everything in the known world during that time, and the damaging effects of this domination can still be felt today. Much later, in the 20th century, Christianity was implemented as a coping mechanism or a psychological survival tool. Generally, for nefarious reasons, but also in an effort to make sense out of the world, comfort others, provide hope, and inspire those who are suffering, hurting, or oppressed. Is it any wonder that religions always tend to thrive, in countries and cities, with the absolute worst economic and social conditions? And finally now, it is used as a manipulation technique, to enslave people's minds, and take away their personal freedom, making them easier to seduce, and once again control, in order to exploit them, and rob them of all their energy, money, and time. It survived the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution, and the Age of Technology, persisting on even now into modernity, not because it is still being enforced in a mandatory sense, but because of the divisive nature of the beliefs themselves, promising rewards for good behavior and punishment for our enemies, as well as the company of an all-knowing, all-powerful, and ever-present friend, who dutifully protects and watches over us, even granting us wishes whenever we're in need, that is, answered prayer. A crafty lie indeed. Who wouldn't want such a benevolent ally on their side? Yet this notion allows for all manner of distorted thinking and delusion, wreaking havoc on the human psyche, and setting the individual up for a melee of confusion and cognitive dissonance, disappointment, and discouragement. And, consequently, a stunting of the natural human ability to use logic and reason, and accurately distinguish fact from fiction, and reality from fantasy, etc. For when the delusion is proven false, and the mighty placebo effect fails, many find themselves broken and lost. Seeking answers and reassurance, that life still has purpose and meaning. Those who are wise enough to see past this fraud, are known as non-believers, atheists, agnostics, skeptics, and anti-theists. They are secularists, naturalists, humanists, scientific pantheists, and critical thinkers. All such persons should be praised, for their independence and staunch determination to walk a higher path, and embrace the hard truths, instead of believing in, and submitting to, a comforting lie. As highly evolved expressions of life, with incredible influence regarding what goes on and what happens on this planet, do you not long for balance, peace, and equilibrium? Aren't you fed up with suffering and violence and war? All of the problems and turmoil and aggression and conflict in the Middle East, is due to warring ideologies involving religious beliefs, holy books, land promised by God and spiritual traditions. It will never end, and there will continue to be violence and bloodshed and war, in places like that around the world, as long as humans continue to cling to their religious delusions concerning a theistic God. We know that right now nature is not conscious in a coherent way, because there is still pain and suffering and heartache and death in the world. There simply cannot be a conscious or coherent God, that knows everything and is fully aware and all-powerful, otherwise it would be pure evil. Due to the inordinate amount of violence, chaos, cruelty, misery, pain, torture, death and suffering existent in human societies, and throughout the animal kingdom as well. There is no cosmic concept of good and evil that exists transcendent from our own experience. These things are only significant in relation to human beings and higher life forms. Good and evil are simply moral constructs that serve as more personalized descriptions of what is chaotic and destructive, and what is healthy and life-affirming, as they relate to us. People struggle with this, but it's really not that complicated. There can be no conscious, transcendent power or universal mind, that is aware of everything, because that would make it an evil monster, due to its complacency, negligence, and apathy, in allowing so much evil and hardship to occur. Beyond just the overwhelming amount of cruelty, violence, horror and suffering humans bring about and inflict upon one another daily, consider what goes on, in the animal kingdom. Here's a quote by renowned evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins: "The total amount of suffering, per year, in the natural world, is beyond all decent contemplation." During the minute that it takes me to compose this sentence, thousands of animals are being eaten alive, many others are running for their lives, whimpering with fear, others are slowly being devoured from within, by rasping parasites. Thousands of all kinds, are dying of starvation, thirst, and disease. It must be so. If there ever is a time of plenty, this very fact will automatically lead to an increase in the population until the natural state of starvation and misery is once again restored. In a universe, of electrons and selfish genes, blind physical forces and genetic replication, some people are going to get hurt, other people are going to get lucky, and you won't find any rhyme or reason in it, nor any justice. The universe that we observe, has precisely the properties we should expect. If there is, at bottom, no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pitiless indifference. Where is the omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, omnibenevolent, aka, all-loving, God of Christianity in all of this? You see, you can have an all-good God, but it cannot be all-powerful. You can have an all-powerful God, but it can't be all-knowing or all-good. Otherwise it would be insanely evil, for allowing all of these atrocities to occur to animals and humans. You can have an all-knowing God, but it can't be all-powerful, because that would make it just another finite and limited being in this universe, and not actually the master of it, so to speak. To philosophers, this conundrum is what has been known for centuries as the problem of evil. It's the old Epicurean paradox: is God willing to prevent evil, but not able? Then he is not omnipotent. Is he able, but not willing? Then he is malevolent. Is he both able, and willing? Then whence cometh evil? Is he neither able, nor willing? Then why call him God? Chapter 7. The Nature of Life. And yet, in all of this, I say, we should still look to nature. Look at the perfect balances, look at the synchronism, look at the interdependency and cooperation of all life. The fantastic designs and the incredible tenacity to sustain, survive and perpetuate itself. Always evolving, always adapting, always growing, changing and becoming more and more complex. Everything being recycled, everything used for a greater purpose, nothing ever wasted. A perfect balance, with the cruel and indifferent laws of natural selection and survival of the fittest, on one side, and synergistic, symbiotic, interrelated and interdependent relationships of cooperation, cohabitation and altruism on the other. We have much to learn. For even knowledge itself is not static or set in permanent stone. Knowledge, as well as wisdom, are always in a constant state of emergence, and so must we be, in order to survive. The laws of nature exist and will always exist to teach us, guide us and inspire us. Everything else will disappoint, everything else is subject to human error. But the universe itself functions with the most incredible proficiency. What better guide? What better source of divine revelation? This is the heart of pantheism, and this is what I believe, that the earth is sacred and the universe itself is divine. The interconnection and interdependency of all life. Along with reverence, respect, and a deep appreciation for the natural world that surrounds us. Contrary to what most religions teach, this earth is our home. This planet and all of its various life forms are essentially our family, and we are all one. The illusion of separation and distinction has caused irrevocable harm, but the truth is evident even on a molecular level. We are all made of the same stuff, atomic elements, atoms and energy, and we all came from the exact same place, the singularity that existed before the Big Bang. When we die, we return to the earth. Our life force and all that we are, gets recycled. Our bodies decay and we are assimilated to fuel other forms of life. Our memories and character live on through our children and our family and friends, and the cycle perpetually repeats itself. Our focus should be on the here and now, on the present and on the future. Not to the archaic fantasies of an ancient past, or the idealized utopia of an imaginary spiritual world that has never been definitively proven to exist. Our efforts, our attention, our energy and our time, should all be directed towards this life and this world, not some intangible, great beyond. It is only those who are unsatisfied and discontent with their current reality that feel the need to create and entertain illusions of an alternate one. As I discussed earlier, our ancestors often lived through incredible difficulties, the most extreme hardships and unimaginable adversities. The religions that we see today were born out of these times, created out of necessity, as a human survival mechanism, to sustain the morale and spirit, of a people who lived in a culture of constant violence, warfare, and oppression. These religions were later used as an avenue of escape, geared toward meeting the universal longings that we all have. Giving solace to the grieving, and hope to the poor, comforting the sick and the oppressed and the downtrodden, this was the entire basis for the Hebrew notion of a Messiah. After this, and especially in the case of Christianity, they were propagated, by men in positions of authority, to unify and control, solidify power and gain wealth, etc. Now, They are used as a means to medicate, placate and encourage. Religion. The greatest human placebo there ever was. Its power is derived from the blind faith and unquestioning obedience of its followers and the common, universal needs it addresses. Endless studies and analysis are made from its documents, infinite sermons and doctrines and teachings are derived from a selected group of writings that may or may not be authentic. The prejudices and biases of its authors are passed on to its followers with little notice, and whole generations are poisoned by its influence, because it is held up as the infallible Word of God, going unchecked, and unchallenged by all. In the name of religious tolerance, its authority is then used to manipulate the weak-minded, by instilling guilt and fear, while simultaneously providing the solutions to these self-destructive emotions, and answering all of life's other problems as well. Billions of dollars are made, from its subsequent promotion and endorsement, as people are sated and fulfilled, artificially. How can this possibly be a good thing? If you subscribe to the whatever works philosophy, then yes, maybe ignorance is bliss, but I believe in the power of truth. That the undeniable import, and weight, of reality, should always reign supreme. What then will you do with your placebo? Can you see the immeasurable harm it will cause when all is revealed to be false? For this reason alone, its origins must be illuminated, and truth and light poured out upon the fantasy. How many have wasted their lives in pursuit of this dream? To them, no doubt, it was not a waste, as they were happy and fulfilled, even in the face of death. But this is not a testimony to the reality of the belief, only a sure statement on the power and strength of the human resolve, to be willing to sacrifice for the sake of whatever it is one wholeheartedly believes. When you give yourself over to something and commit yourself to it, it becomes your reality, regardless of whether it is actually true or not. I have lived out this experience and I know this process intimately. But the question remains, is it better to believe a lie and be happy, in naive and delusional ignorance, or to seek the truth and suffer from the separation, isolation and sorrow that it causes? Your only consolation, that you followed your convictions and remained grounded in reality, no matter how ugly or lonely it was. I have chosen to do the latter. I have suffered immeasurably on both sides. Nevertheless, I cannot waver from this path, I cannot be led astray again, I will not. Come what may, I must hold fast to the truth that I have learned, and share my knowledge, and experience, and insight, with others, and here at last, I have. Why is it that atheists and agnostics often know more about the origins and precepts of most religions than believers do themselves? Simple, because they choose to study more than just one accepted, holy book, and they are free to read all information available on the subject, including all the parts that churches and religious leaders seem to collectively ignore, or conveniently rewrite, or reinterpret, in an effort to make religious texts more palatable. I know this is difficult for some, I know how hard it is to let go of deeply held beliefs and discard such cherished and enduring notions, and this is the anxiety we all must face as we come into a deeper understanding of the truth. I was a devout, evangelical Christian for years before I became a pantheist, and I know exactly what it feels like to lose everything and have my faith repeatedly deconstructed and then rebuilt again and again. It's a scary thing to consider that there's no one up there looking out for you, no one guiding or protecting you. That all those prayers to have angels protect you while you drive, or watch over you while you travel, or protect your children when you are far away, or heal your body or the body of your loved ones when they are sick, that all these prayers have fallen on deaf ears and there was no one really listening, etc. It's the terrifying idea that we're on our own in this world, and that there may never be any real justice or rewards for all the good that you've done, and no ultimate punishment for the wicked, beyond what they suffer in this life, etc. Trust me, I know these doubts and fears all too well, I wrestled with them for years. But let me share some things with you that may help. We are our own masters, We control our own destinies. We are responsible for ourselves and the paths we take. There is no one, up there, but that's okay, because we have something even closer that's even smarter than any invented, bronze-aged God, made in the image of corrupted and fallible men. We have nature. Our divine nature is within us and the omnipresent teacher that is all around us everywhere we go, the natural world. We have the highest intelligence watching over us, our own instincts. And we have the greatest moral judge there is, to govern this world, the laws of cause and effect, and our own, elevated sense of right and wrong, via our highly evolved human brains, that have the ability to think and reason and judge all things correctly. We have the intellectual and emotional human conscience, which acts as a guide, to steer us, in the right direction. We have all the incredible gifts, of science and nature, to heal our bodies through plants and herbs, and all the glorious benefits, of living on such a lush, green planet that is so wonderfully suited for us and filled with such diversity and complexity and endless mysteries to explore and discover. All things considered, we are very lucky. In fact, I would even venture so far as to say, we are blessed. It's a completely different way of looking at things, I know. But I guarantee you, it is a much, much better way. A few quotes to consider. Take the risk of thinking for yourself. Much more happiness, truth, beauty, and wisdom, will come to you that way. Christopher Hitchens. Atheism is more than just the knowledge that gods do not exist and that religion is either a mistake or a fraud. Atheism is an attitude, a frame of mind that looks at the world objectively, fearlessly, always trying to understand all things as a part of nature. Emmett F. Fields.